So thank you, Alkistis, for joining me, and thanks all of you that are attending. We This is like, in my opinion, it's a conversation that's like 2 years in the making around having with you, because it was really not only your work, but it was actually watching you perform Visitation that really aligned a lot of thoughts I was having and experiences I was having. And it led me to really delve deeper into what we even really understand as being astral magic. And so I hope that becomes apparent to people as we go through. But for those that don't know Alkistis Dimech, Alkistis is a dancer and choreographer, writer, and the co-founder with Peter Gray of Scarlet Imprint, an independent press at the forefront of contemporary esotericism and occultism. She's a practitioner of Ankuko Buto, dark of danceness, the dark dance, or it was the slash there, the dark dance or the dance of darkness, and has been practicing that since 2002, developing a philosophy and praxis of the body that encompasses and explores its occult, magical, mystical, mythic, and sexual dimensions. Her performance, writings, and presentations can be found online at alkistisdimech.com and in The Brazen Vessel, which was published by Scarlet Imprint in 2019. I'll go ahead and pop Alkistis's website into there, because today we'll look at Visitation, but you have several other dances that also are shown to some extent there. Yeah. I also highly recommend The Brazen Vessel. Like, I think if you're inspired to take some of this further, your understanding of it, you're interested in really sitting with some of the things Alkistis has kind of been presenting, as well as Peter Gray's, because I think we can't really exclude one from the other when we're talking about the two of you, but you can to a certain extent also. And I think what's nice about The Brazen Vessel is seeing how they lay together. And Keith said he's making his way through it slowly. I would say it is a book to take your time to go through, and sit with each piece within that has really profound, a lot packed into a very concise statement. So myself, I have a background in anthropology and education, and but have a long-term affinity. I had a grandmother that was a sculptor and a dancer, and my sister is also an active performing dancer and teaches dance as well. And so even though I didn't follow that impulse, I've been dancing actively since I was very small. And I think it's a natural motivation. Again, having worked with children, the spontaneous expression of movement is just something that happens, you know? And I think that as we get older and are more enculturated or indoctrinated into whatever chosen and non-chosen paths that we take, we tend to be able to pay attention to the more full embodied experience of things, to a greater capacity or less capacity, depending on how that's gone.
Yeah.
And I think that within astral magic, the current trends, a lot of it are around, a lot of it do rely on textual tradition. They also rely on very specific kinds of magic that doesn't always draw attention to the somewhat ubiquitous dimension in which we're all interacting, which is very much embodied.
Yes, and we're always embodied. This is the thing, like everything is movement. We're not, even when we're just sitting and breathing, we're moving. So, and that dynamic quality about like living bodies is something that I keep trying to emphasize, because it's not that you have to be a dancer or anything, but it's simply that recognition that our consciousness is dynamic. When we visualize something, that's a dynamic action. When like it is held within you, but it still belongs to that dynamic living animate life. And so dance is a particularly deep manifestation of this impulse, which is at work all the time, and it's sort of extending it into different spheres. But I think that it brings that presence of the body to the fore, particularly because you are thinking with the body rather than the body is in the background while other processes are happening, and your head is the focus for that. You sort of, we get up here.
True. It's so true. And I think that that similarly along that, you know, one of my first inclinations was working with the Venus cycle. And I had already been exposed to your work, and had been exposed to my own explorations of Buto, which I am not in any way formally trained, but I think you can always use ideas and see how they sit with you and practice things, and they inform us. But I was compelled, you know, when it was originally through the idea of retrograde action, like this moving backwards, you know, and how it just struck me immediately then, like dancing and the movement of the heavens, like it's all moving. And this is something that we want to talk about to start with, which is to help us have a little context for talking about visitation. But I don't know, do you have anything you'd like to say immediately about that before we look at a bit of visitation?
That connection with the astral dance is like, was there from the beginning, because if the dance is something that is happening very, very deep within your body, at the same time, it's the whole cosmos is moving and dancing. I wanted to like use dance to somehow bring those worlds closer together. So that was definitely a motivation. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it all collided at that moment for me because it was Venus retrograde in Scorpio, and it was very much like this underworld encounter and dance of darkness. You know, there's that, some of the original writings that are there about it are about this idea of looking back at the living world through the eyes of the dead.
Yes.
You know, what changes about us when we look at something from a different perspective. And I think a lot of the Venus cycle can really help you to start to understand the underworld, upper world dynamics in many ways. But
this, what you say as well about seeing from different perspectives, is very much part of the work that I spoke about when I gave the talk on mantic visions. It was also this recognition that we have many different kinds of vision, and so we can place ourselves from different points, like in the underworld, and see from there. And doing Buto, you do learn to place your sight within the body, so you bring that sight to very like quite extreme body states sometimes, and that gives you a completely different perspective, or you transform your body in I don't know how you would say, I guess it starts in the imaginal. It's an imaginative transformation, but it partakes of mimesis as well as an inner feeling, a sort of a pathos, a coming close to the thing that you are approaching as an image. It's very much working with images. And so I was always, and I am, one of the things that fascinates me the most is this interaction between images and the body, and the way that images cause movement or capture and encapsulate movement. So it's very much a part of my choreographic process, is to sort of capture and hold images and relate them to these almost bodily hieroglyphs, and extend movement from those points. So this
definitely,
this the thing about vision is that we have, like, you might have an out of body experience, but you are still connected to your body. This was sort of the point I've got to with this, that we are always in some relation to the body. Even when we are dead and you're just bones, the bones are still in a process of transformation and are still like materia that hold consciousness. And so there is still some residing. I think this is how, you know, ghosts and the echoes of these kind of chthonic forces also somehow are still shimmering in the air and are still present within our bodies as well, and we can interact with them. Perhaps the best way to interact with some of these is in dream, because it allows us to see and experience spirits that are sometimes too fragile or too aerial to actually like touch or encounter in daylight. So a lot of these explorations have been in working with different visionary states, and particularly the subtle states like dream or just in trance, where you allow visions to come up through doing breath work and so on. Mm-hmm. This was kind of part of the process for this dance as well, just exploring those potential ways of visually bringing something into your body and then allowing that to flower as movements and to sort of energize, like bring the energy through and almost blood the images to make them pulse again.
Yes, bring them to life in many ways through expression and various
through the body
enactment
in that place. So it's the dance was conceived as being, it's almost a shamanic dance, part process and part performance. So I was very much considering from the beginning the circular chorus as the dancing ground, which is like a sort of a shamanic space where you have already separated this from the rest of existence, temporally and spatially. And that this space that you create with the body and through also the attention of the audience on that space, sort of interacting with the visual of being seen as well as seeing. This was so sort of the first layer of building the performance and the dance idea, and how it would how that space would hold what was going to happen and how the witnessing might occur in that space. So yes, this space is very important in the creating the vision.
Yes. And I think too, the thing that was for me is that when in terms of visitation, your choreography is based on your own knowledge that you have about what happens when the body and the emotional states are engaged in movement, and your understanding of those psychophysical processes that occur. But specifically, you're at least and we'll talk a little bit more about this after we watch a little bit of the dance, which is that you wanted to put it in a form that could be replicated, not necessarily in the exact experience, but to create something that could be a ritual form of choreography.
Yeah, there was one of my, it was something, it was like an experiment I wanted, because I know that I can do this, and I know that I have like a sort of a physiological propensity to be able to do that, and I've also trained that through dancing and the ritual or magic work. I wanted to see if I could take these forms and if there's something I could make very clear that I could put in other people's bodies. So the dance was designed from the beginning as potentially work that could be given to other people to then take and explore those movements and those dynamic postures with their own bodies. So to find that space within their bodies. And I think in a sense, I wanted to formalize some of what I do as part of my practice, which is sort of like the use of the axis, the vertical axis, the spine, the way that the energy is, let's say, tightened and pulled, and these tensions are played within the body. It's like a musical instrument, or when you speak, the voice, there are these forces always at play, and I wanted to create forms that would give people the architecture within which those forces would play. So they would have to bring something to it, but there is already something there's a structure to place that on. So it's not that it's like any meditation, if you sit there nothing's going to happen, but if you sit there and you do the correct muscular contractions and the breathing and the visualization, then it starts to happen. So it was really to create that possibility, something that could be transmitted.
Definitely. And in specifically with Visitation, there was a desire to not only go to the planet Venus, but bring the planet Venus, sort of, if we want to call it that, into the space that we were and have an encounter with that spirit.
Yeah, Venus. I'm a devotee of Babalon, so it's through that I've tried to work with Babalon. I work with Babalon through both the lunar and Venusian aspects, and also thinking in terms of the Great Bear as well as a major. But primarily it's Venus for me, as the sort of the star. And so it was always intriguing. Why this connection? Because Babalon is also very different than a lot of the other love goddesses, especially the sort of Aphrodite. I know they're trouble and they're kind of a handful, but there's also something kind of soft and I don't know, a sort of a difference. And Babalon is a very this, and I've always experienced her like so forceful, so erupting, so almost violent, and caring nothing for even the body that she's interested in. And I wanted to reconcile this the sexual energy that is so much a feature of working with Babalon, and this force which is incredible and is unlike any other experience with planet. With like literally I wanted to know what is it about this, because it didn't correspond to the traditional sympathia in many ways. I mean, some things are very there, but some things are also like not explained.
Yes.
What comes through with Babalon is a much more apocalyptic and violent vision. And I actually found that in Venus when I started to look at the scientific material. So the imagings of the planet and the sort of research that had been carried out, and there's not that much of it, but this is, I was picking up books like this, you know, giant tomes of
Venus too.
geology, geophysics, atmosphere, and solar wind environment, you know, with all
That's amazing.
and it's like the planet is insane. She is absolutely volatile and so dynamic and always changing. Her surface changes quite a lot because she has so much the suspected volcanic activity. And so I started to see how there actually is this correspondence between the occult sex, the occult feminine sex, and Venus, which has like, it's concealed behind this veil of sulfuric clouds, which is the reason for its effulgence and brilliance and its absolute domination of the night sky and the morning sky when she comes up. So there's that aspect, but then there's behind that this ever-changing, completely volatile, transforming planet that is living and also absolutely hostile to life, or our kind of life. This was
yes. Well, I mean, I think why I would call what I mean, and I don't think it's the only way to label something. I'm not attached to the perfect label, but the idea that I experienced it as like an avant-garde form of astral magic, because if you think about it, a lot of what we think of as astrological magic now kind of obscures the magico-religious aspect of its nature, really, which is that it is about encounter a lot of times with others, you know, and sometimes these others are smaller, sometimes they're really big. Sometimes they're tied to very primal forces that we barely understand, but we intuit in many ways. And you know, the idea of encountering, let's just go to a different context, the idea that in the past you could have one could have participated in an encounter where someone was magicking something to happen or event, you know, and in doing so brought you into contact with whatever it was that they were bringing forth, you know, through what they were doing. And that was my experience, you know, without knowing much about what your intention was behind Visitation. Something entered the room and And it was this orb shape that descended into the room to begin with. And then, you know, and it'll become a little clear when we talk about the piece specifically, then when you're really encountering that spirit and getting it into you fully, you know, which is my understanding, that's when a lot of weird stuff started to happen for me inside of myself, and also to the axes of the room, where there was like shifting that started to happen around how I understood where I was and where you were and the orientation of things. So I don't know if you want to say any more about that before we go ahead and watch a little bit of it.
I was very interested when you spoke to me afterwards and told me about your experience, because I wondered if, I know in performance, it's really important. Like, the audience isn't a passive element of performance watching. The audience and the attention and this sense of unity that's created by the poetic act or the dancer standing in a place is absolutely intrinsic to the energetic manifestation of it. It's part of the chalice that holds the spirit. So I think it was, in a sense, proof of concept. I didn't know if that would happen, if it could have this, because as well, I'm also aware, and we've spoken about this, how much being confronted with bodies can be difficult for people, because the body is such a site of conflict now, especially. But I think always, and it always has been something where people perhaps have reservations to go there. So I didn't know if how people would react, because it's very much based on what they're there for, and it's not something they're acclimatized to, especially dance, and you're used to seeing dance and watching dance and participating with it. And I think that's also quite foreign to a lot of people now. It's quite an although it's becoming more popular, like because of TV shows that have dancing on. So people are getting used to this aspect of it. But there's been a long time that I'm aware that people would come up to me after performances and they just wouldn't know what to say. They would be like, "Oh, I hurt, I couldn't watch you," or all these kind of reactions, because it brought up so many almost unspeakable feelings in them. So my concerns were that people, especially at an academic conference, mixed practitioners in academy, but how the reaction would be. But I think that it worked. And I think that your reaction showed that even in this avant-garde setting, because as well, it's experimental. We're not in a culture that is entrained to understand this. So the dances that always inspired me at the beginning were particularly the Japanese traditional dance and Southeast Asian dances. And they are completely culturally contained and make sense. So everybody understands, plus the depth that these movements have been ancestrally trained within these people's bodies, as well, like through lineages. So they inherit this as well as trained from childhood. And the whole culture is aware of the meanings and the movements and can understand and follow. And that's not the case with sacred dance now in the West, because there isn't really such a thing. There's dance in this very sort of slightly dissociating middle class go to a theater,
of course,
context,
yes,
which has some, I mean, I don't think it's middle class, but there is that perception by some people that it's sort of for those people, and it's not something that people can access, even though everybody has a body and everybody can dance. And even if they think they can't, like, we are movement. And so this should be the most accessible and the most readily to experience.
But I think that there's so much about, again, our enculturation, socialization, indoctrination. We've lost a lot of the spontaneous ability. And that was something I noticed with really young children.
Yeah.
You know, working with 1 to 5-year-olds for like 5 years, you really do see how with their body they are.
Yeah.
You know, and how natural that feels for them. And you know, so that said, we'll watch, I think what we could do is probably watch just a little bit at the start, okay. But as I'm getting it up to go, did you want to say something about the filming of it particularly? Because it's different than being there and actually seeing it, of course.
The film is quite different than the dance, and I didn't edit it. I didn't even realize it was going to be filmed. I became vaguely aware that there was a man with a camera lurking around the stage at certain points, but I just tuned it out. So I generally like kept him the sense that there was someone there just out of my consciousness. So I had no control over what he did, or I was just kind of, I didn't mind because it didn't disturb me, but yeah, it wasn't something planned, and it's kind of stands as a document of the performance, but it doesn't give you a sense of the choreography strictly, because it's filmed very close rather than giving you a sense of space.
Yes, exactly. That was the first thing I noticed.
Yeah, and so I don't know, because sometimes when things are filmed with the space, you still don't get a sense of the performance. So there's different ways and approaches to doing this, but I think that it's a document, but a document is not the same thing. It becomes an artifact in its own, in one sense. That's kind of related, but not the thing itself.
No, but maybe we can call on some of whatever the thing itself is by watching a bit of it. And I think this is the part where you're really emphasizing the circular, right? And creating that. The first part definitely shows that.
The first part is called Ilinx. And you know, when you were talking about children and how in touch with their bodies they are, there were two references I had for this. And one was something I used to do as a child, which was make myself dizzy. And I used to go around and around in circles and in all kinds of ways. Like I would do it standing up. I would do it like on my knees. I would do all kinds of like just experimenting and making myself dizzy and spinning and all this stuff. But the other thing it references was kind of the temple dances of Java. I wanted to create this magical atmosphere where the deities are just starting to like manifest. You is something very sensitive, something very, so you're feeling out with the extension throughout, and everything is based on the circle. So I can talk more about it afterwards. It's fundamental to the thing working. So
totally we'll watch it right now. Let me get it. I also had that anytime I ever did any dance with my sister, we always needed JD's part where he spins. There was always this JD spinning part. And if folks in the chat can just let me know that they see it and hear it.
It's kind of
I'll
like
stop
squished
there.
together the first and the second
Yes.
parts, and the second part is very, very compressed. There's just a moment of that.
Yes, I know. We can go back a little bit and
Okay.
watch that
Yes, please.
piece. You know, I think that what I wanted people to get from this was the idea as well that I think your work is really unique in how you are, you know, and where I've tried to encourage you more to get more specific, maybe about like how, and to a certain extent, because I think it's there. When you spoke about it though, with me, you know, there's some technique that you use to help you start to understand this process that you wanted to engage in. Is there anything you want to say about what we just looked at, specifically the circular aspect of what's going on? And then
Yeah, well, I mentioned before about the sort of the initial idea of temple dances, and but the piece was called Illings because referencing the concept of Roger Caillois on play. So one of his forms, he has 4 forms of play he's arranged it in, and one of them is Illings, which he describes as the pursuit of vertigo to destabilize like the perception and to inflict a kind of voluptuous panic. So it's to take the to take that daily state away, to take that first like diurnal consciousness, day consciousness out, and to move you through this process to night consciousness. And I slowed it right down because I've tried all different kind of speeds and ways to do this, but I found that what was most effective to make an opening, and I'm kind of influenced by no theatre. You have to have this long walk to the stage, which is actually, although it's not the performance, it's part of the performance, because this walk from like exiting the makeup room and the preparation, walking to the stage where you take the place is actually the way that you get into state. And so this Illings was for me, I took it into this very, very slow meditative thing. And I just wanted to mention Anji Cheung's music. It's absolutely intrinsic to the visionary states that are trying to be like, that I'm trying to evoke in people watching, but also for my own process. And I worked with her quite closely, but she's also very intuitive, and she understood exactly what I was trying to get with each section. And she made something that just created absolutely the atmosphere that I could like move and feel in. So the space, this circle, the horos was already energized through the music and being energized. But I wanted to slow it down and actually just stretch it to a very, like a really taut state. So there's this huge tension across the body, and then to work on the vertical axis to the sacrum tucked in and pulled. So the spine is being pulled, and the concentration is going from the sex to the heart to the eyes and the above. And having this, using the arms across, is to begin to open that heart space, but also that feeling out into the sort of peripheral to the furthest reaches. So I took this image of the circle and this circular movement, and the whole piece, when I was researching, I'm kind of fascinated by the Russian avant-garde, and I found a concept by Sergei Steligov on the space or the consciousness of the chalice or cup and cupola. So it's the cup cupola consciousness or space. And I was working with this throughout the whole piece, both in terms of my body, the movement, and the way I conceived the space and what was going on, the interaction between like the cup of the dancing space held by the audience and the cupola of the sky that I was trying to bring down, and this relationship between the two. And so this is like the first to make the space and taking, like slowly revolving through, like tracing circles, both with the way I move and also in terms of the feet and just these circular things, but having a very similar thing going through in my spine. So I'm bringing the energy up in circles and tightening and squeezing at the same time. The sort of, it just heats, but heating in a way that's coming to heat, not a fast way. I wanted to make it a very measured approach.
Definitely. And I think you did have that, because I was trying to tell people when we watched it last night, how long was, because again, I wasn't participating in normal thinking about time, but when I was watching it originally, but it was at least 25 minutes long, wasn't it?
28 minutes.
Yeah, I think it was, I was like, it was close to half an hour, which you don't get from, you know, you do see it on the, you see when you start to sweat, you know what I mean? Then you're like, oh shit, she's been at it for a while. But in the dance, you don't see, the video, you don't see it as clearly. But you took your time with that.
That was
that part
very slow. Yeah, it was about feeling into the space. It was that inviting opening. So all of the and my, at that moment, for that period, it was about the dreaming, the visualizing, the arousing the desire, because as I was speaking about yesterday, if anybody heard that talk, so much of this drawing something to you, or this enmeshing of bodies, or entangling between the celestial and the earthly body, or becoming engodded, is about the way desire just opens you up in that way, and especially focusing in this piece on the heart space as the sort of, as the point of connection that modifies the sexual energy, which is like the power, the rocket fuel, and then the visionary capacity, which I wanted to really work on in that dance particularly. I'm not often putting my emphasis on that, but I really did in this dance want it to be that I wanted the confirmation that I would see a vision, whether or not anyone else did. So I did it in order that the process would create in me a vision of the goddess, or the numina that are present through the performance.
Definitely. And I think, you know, to step it back a little bit, just some of the things I think are foundational to understanding with a lot of this. And for me, you express it really clearly in the stuff that you do with the occulted body. You know, your piece, I blanked on the name of the article all of a sudden. What was it? The
Dynamics of the occulted body, that one.
I was like, it's dynamics or something. I was like, oh, I've read it so many times.
I forget it all too.
So the thing with that is that, you know, you place that, you're trying to bring attention back to the primacy of the body as ground consciousness. You know, that while we tend to attend to a lot of the little bits, there's this deeper thing that it's all tied to.
I think it's absolutely critical, because at this level of the ground, or the root consciousness, the soil of the body, and there are different depths to this occulted body. I just used occulted body because I think people don't see the body. I think people see a body and think that's a body, and they're not aware that we're covered with skin, and the skin is sheltering and so much beneath it, and layers, and not just in a physical sense, but in a psychic sense, and in a subtle sense as well. But these are all totally interwoven and connected, so I don't think you can begin to understand the subtle body, or the workings that you would do with like subtle visualizations, without having to go into this root soil and work with that. And I think at the level of these deeper levels of consciousness, the body consciousness is where the synesthesias take place, where there is this synesthetic mixing of all the senses. So it's the kinesthetic sense that binds whether it's vision, smell, and that's how we get the depth of perception. Even in our visual perception, we have more information, because all the time at the level of the body, the physical material body, we have this continual exchange of communication, of knowledge, of communion of the senses happening there. So I think only by like energizing that body, by arousing that through movement, do you really even awaken your capacity for visualization.
Right. Totally, which is why I think, you're talking about spinning. You're also talking about, for a lot of us, where we first might encounter this is in trauma as well. And then also in, which could be related as well, is during sex, where you're kind of attuning to that synesthetic aspect of the body in a more direct way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think through and trauma and sex have been a part of my process for a long time. But I guess initially it was through trauma that I came to dance, and through these kind of experiences that I couldn't control with my body, and learning that in order to work with that, I had to actually master that and gain some deeper understanding of what was going on. So, and be able to then work with it. So it was initially like traumatic experiences that awakened these potentials. And I think we learn a lot from illness, from trauma. I don't think these are things that we necessarily need to shut out of our lives. I think we need renegotiate our relationship with them, and also with the idea how we are whole, and not to clear ourselves and to pretend like, take the pills and smile and this kind of neutralizing and blanking. No, I think you really have to go down into it, and you have to bring out something beautiful and transform it, and recognize that that's also a part of how you are growing. And I think that's something else I understood through this Venusian work, is that the forces of the, like, deep within the planet are so powerful that they create these amazing structures that you can see on the surface. Like I can show you some slides I had from the presentation that I did, and I'll share them, of these things like arachnoids, and they're like volcanic patterns, but they're like spider webs. And so, because one of the things that obsesses me is like pattern, and the way signs are formed out of natural patterns, and they have meanings. It's not the Saussurean sense that there is a sign and it's not related at all to its meaning. It's like through the body, these things, there are corporeal realities underlying all of these signs, underlying all meanings. There's a reality, that's why it has a meaning. And so I was fascinated to see the patterns that emerge through stress. And so much of my work is through this tension and then the release, and this kind of cracking, and some of it is obviously unavoidable because of being crazy, and some of it is worked with and deliberately used through the body process, through dance, through the training, through everything, through walking, through sort of using weights and things to be able to develop your ability to concentrate and focus more, strength and internalize more. So and using breath to release it.
Yes, and I think that what you see within different traditions that have a bit more of an animate conception of body mind, that's you do see how all of those things are sort of woven together. And something that I wanted to highlight too is the idea of how movement, you've got this ground consciousness, you got the primacy of movement, and then the idea of how it can generate knowing. It's generative of gnosis, that we can know through this, which I don't think is clear to people, and a lot of our knowing does come through it actually in the end.
I think a lot of it's opaque because again, we're not conscious of how much information we get through the body. We think of it in terms, we sort of base everything up here in like the sort of control station brain. But so many things, like without you even thinking, you do things. You know how to write. You don't have to think how to write. If you had to think about all the processes it takes to pick up a pen and form letters with it, you couldn't direct that with your mind. This is something that you've just absorbed into your body, and these things and behaviors are like this, laid down over like strata of millennia. And I mean, I kind of noticed that I didn't start dancing. I just decided to become a dancer at 28. It was very late, too late to be a dancer, but I did have my mother's body, and my mother was a ballet dancer. So it's as if I had inherited from her something that, even though I hadn't worked or trained myself, I had a capacity to move because she had. And so I began to be aware that these things do have an ancestral component, and that not just, you know, in a direct relationship like me and my mother, which is very close, but we can, and this is one of the things that I've explored through Buddha, we can access other forms through our body because we do have so much in common. There is this like mimetic capacity that we have, which is very powerful. I think humans more than any other animal.
Yeah.
And in a particular way, we have this ability to like tell stories through actions, to communicate without language. And I think this is why I'm so obsessed with movement as being like absolutely fundamental to any kind of gnosis.
Right. And I think too, to draw the connections a little bit closer, you know, and I had referenced this in a chat before with someone, but the idea of, you know, astrology is really ready to map the sky onto the body and see the body is mapped onto the sky. And that's a very old idea. It's not like a new astrological concept, but the idea of the, when the idea that we're moving and being moved, you know, you really start to feel the connection, heaven and little heaven, or whatever you want to call it.
Yes, the being moved thing is, I sort of connected with that engodded state, the entranced state where you are, but it's so difficult to explain the experience. It's as if you consciously don't have to, you just stop, something else takes over and moves you, and it's just that simple. It's just movement comes out of your body. In fact, I think sometimes it's not even another entity that is doing it. Sometimes I feel that it's just the body letting go, like the sort of the clamp on the mind, letting go and just allowing things to flow through you. And it could be whatever it could be. I mean, this is a really beautiful way to just improvise and just allow oneself to move without thinking about it at all, and to just to have the courage and the faith that you can follow a movement from its beginning, from its inception, and through your entire body, wherever you've decided it starts, at your foot, for example, and to follow that movement up through the leg and through the torso and out, you know, through the arm. When you like first start training Buto and you don't know what you're doing, you kind of like imitate people and you're moving bits at different, it doesn't make sense. Like movement has a life of its own, and movement has its own spirit almost that makes it, that directs it, its own intelligence, and that intelligence can merge with other intelligences. Hence you can invoke into your body other forces or powers or intelligences to share in your body and direct you. But equally, like there is, even as there is the ground of the body, this consciousness at the base, there is also that consciousness in movement. Movement just moves, like you can't stop water flowing. And I think the water aspect is so fundamental to life. There isn't life without water, and the body is made of water, and this watery aspect of the body is so critical to its moving and animate nature and its inspirited nature, because water can contain so much. Water, you can dilute water, you can drop ink in it and it will change it. So I kind of think of the body having that capacity to be infused or enthused with a daimonic intelligence, but at the same time to be just empty and move and have this capacity no matter what.
Right, which we normally think of that as being like a mechanistic thing, you know,
Not at all, not
just
at all.
move. And it's
Very
like,
much not.
no,
Yeah,
no, at
no,
all.
no.
And I think too, the last little piece, just to draw it a little clear for people, is the idea that you put forward about this enfolded, entangled matrix, you know, that is the source of physical form, but also of the psyche. And then you see how that is also connected to things that are outside of what we normally think of as our body, and how engaging more fully with the embodied aspect of what we're attending to, we engage more fully with that which we don't normally think of as our body.
And all our perceptions of the world are through the body. So if you want to broaden your perception of the world, it's really in a kind of concert or in communion with all of nature around you, or with the specific, in the case of Visitation, I was focusing very specifically on Venus and obsessing over Venus. But in a general sense, and in a sense that anyone can do, whether they're a dancer or not, is simply to keep feeding this awareness between the body and the space.
Definitely.
And extending that, because
Yeah.
I have no doubt that we're made of light as well. We're like water infused, like suffused with light. So because there is no dimension to light, there's no limit to light, the light that we are is absolutely like coterminous with all the light in the universe. So although the matter is in a particular space and time, the light isn't. So we have this ability, even through our body, even through the very nature of being a living spirit, an embodied light, water, elemental creature, we still have this capacity to interact with everything else in the cosmos.
Definitely. And I think too, what you highlight in Dynamics, the occulted body, is the idea of learning to be more aware of this dark body, this like interior body. You know, a lot of our attention as astrologers and astro magicians tends to go outside of us, you know, and we don't even think what in us is reaching out to that, you know what I mean? Because it's not just a like, we're just this thing looking out. You know, so much is missed, but how you draw the attention to the interior aspect of the body.
Yes, when we were speaking, I remember you telling me something about how you were observing stars in the sky to understand something about their nature when you're reading charts. That really interested me, because everything is based on observation. Everything has to be based on a direct observation of life, nature, as we encounter it, and a continual refinement of that, and through whatever means we can. But our primary means is the body, and the means that we always, even if we use a tool such as a microscope, it always returns to our eye in order to be understood and comprehended by us. I feel that the body, this dark body, the occulted body, increasingly opens up and becomes a light body the more you bring consciousness into it, and the more I interact with other intelligences directly through my body. They manipulate and bring awareness to what it is, what it can become, what it is becoming, in a way that it lights up. I feel the light in it, and you feel almost as if landscapes and patterns are being built in your body while interacting through movement, and also through meditation, when the movement is an energetic movement rather than, and your posture is still. So I absolutely, I everywhere the same patterns are, you know, the same forms are repeated everywhere, the same, we're all built out of this harmonies. So I think that bringing from an astrological perspective, bringing that back to the body, and there was in the past a strong resonance between the sky and the body,
and there is still in certain traditions, like in Taoism, there's strong practice.
Oh, very much. Yeah, that's quite informed my understanding of Buddha as well. I mean, I've adulterated my Buto with all kinds of other other influences, like the
plow in
tantric body and the Taoist energy work a lot. I was doing these things before I started Buto, so that was how I began to understand how to work with my energy, and that's very cosmically oriented.
It is, yeah, it draws the connection immediately. I think
Yeah.
we brought the thought home, like importance of the body mind and its potentials, you know, the idea that it has a lot of potentials in magical practice, but also very, very Merleau-Ponty, like the idea of getting better attuned to the experience of our own flesh helps us to know the flesh of the world, you know?
Yeah, it's exactly, fundamentally we're made of the same stuff. We have the same elemental substrate.
Right.
So there is this potential of recognition between us and the other. It's not entirely different to us, it's just configured differently. There is this, I do believe there's some way we are enfolded into each other. I used to have like spontaneous, I would disassociate from my body and just go into a state where my body felt like it was expanding. I used to do this as a child, and my body would expand until I couldn't feel the skin anymore, and I would fall into it and it would open up like space, like the night sky, and I would be able to move through that space. And I sort of I think now connecting that to like the occulted body stuff, that the sort of the origins must have been in those experiences, and having this sense that the body contains so much more space, and that's also space to be present in. So
yeah, and I think too, the last, and I want to turn to Keith's question, you know, is I do think something that people can think about with an easy way approaching some of the technique of Buto. I'll read the question out, but
I can't see it.
Don't worry. The idea there is that I think one of the fundamental ones that people can take away, that when you hold inner images, something happens, you know, and a lot of people, a lot of dancers will, and when I've tried to speak to them about this, they just want to start with the idea, oh, it sounds like improvisational dance, you know, like you're just holding, and this is some of the critiques of Buto as well. People have different ideas about its legitimacy as a dance form and whatnot. The idea there being mainly that, and I think it goes back to the body's mimetic faculty, you know, that you've highlighted in some of your work. When we hold inner images, something happens, you know.
They move us.
Yes, it moves us, exactly. And it's so fundamental that we don't even think about it normally.
And the image also encapsulates time. So there's also a sort of, almost as if there's a sense of a signature or a measure of time that's held within the image. So that movement also resonates in that it's like a sense of movement, a quality of movement, and also that's a rhythmic quality too. And that's also contained in an image. They evoke feelings which are tied to particular, like a particular heartbeat or these things, bodily sensations. And so working directly with images like that, you're also using using the imaginal as I just think the body and the imaginal are one, you know. But you're directly working with the body as a visionary creature. It's so hard to explain without explaining.
No, I think but it happens instantaneously, and starts. It's not just it goes to one place, it unfolds.
Yes.
You know, like you're talking about, it starts to create more movement, and then it unfolds. And this is what I, you know, want to try to encourage people to do. And when we're talking about encountering spirits that we often think of within astral magic, there is something about them that is can be very other to us. You know, and this ability that we can have to use this process of that Buto has to be able to encounter oneself as other,
Yeah.
but then also have encounters with other, you know what I mean? That is different than we normally relate to it.
Buddha does enable that space to have these encounters at the periphery or at the edge. It's very much movement at the edge of consciousness in some ways. You are I like this encounter with the other in my body, which is why when I choreograph, I leave enough space in the dance for that encounter to happen, because I think it's necessary to have that opportunity for chance or the thing to manifest, and not everything is like tightly made and there can be no intrusion. I mean, it works differently with different dance forms, but I'm interested in this looser form that has that capacity to encounter otherness. And it means that there's also a quality where you are aware of yourself as not yourself, and that's also very interesting too, because you leave yourself open, and then you are also not consciously closed to experiences. And I think so much of, especially the sort of adulting, is about closing oneself. And so much of Buto and so much of what I want to do with this experience of dance is this opening or flowering to the world. So,
and I think that what's important for me, to bring it back to some of what some of the other people have spoken about over the weekend,
yeah,
in my opinion, a lot of what we're really engaged with is, at the heart of it, is an encounter. You know, something, we encounter something, and then we develop all these ways of trying to speak to or try to understand whatever that original encounter is. Later they become rigidly sort of like, here is the way of thinking about these things. Sorry.
the meaning becomes crystallized or fixed in.
Exactly.
I try to avoid that fixity, actually, but yes, I can see that the temptation is always to understand with the mind rather than allow the encounter to affect you at a deeper level, the body consciousness, the ground consciousness, in such a way that you become closer to that thing, or you develop the resistance. If that thing is a bad thing, like a virus, you develop the resistance and the antibodies. You know it, your body knows it. It's that trusting that the body knows, and trusting that you listen to those deeper intuitions, which are themselves kind of movements, what they're impulses to take you towards something or away from something at the most basic level. So the eyes, you know, the eyes lead you.
Yes, and I think it's a good moment to look at, you know, and then we'll turn back to the piece and we'll finish with the last bits there. But with Keith's question, stars are sometimes thought of as the footsteps of our ancestors. Could dance be a form of star walking, following in their footsteps, creating or bringing constellations to or onto the earth?
That's lovely. What a beautiful image.
Yeah, I think there's no way to not do that. If you're,
I think very much that could be a very interesting way to work with this. I was really intrigued. There's a Hittite text that talks about the stars incanting medicines, and so the stars are also incanting your body. If you dance consciously with the stars, you are being like, they're irradiating you with their energies and forces, they're incanting you. And I kind of like this idea. It's almost with Buddha as well, this concept that you're being pulled by strings, and where those strings come from are like very distant, very, very remote, the furthest reaches of the universe. So one can build this embodied connection with constellations.
yes.
And
it can be really helpful to vibrate them, right?
yes, and using voice as well as body, like not forgetting the voice, because the voice is part of it is carnal too. It's part of what our body does. So resonating through voice as well as through movement with the stars, and then you're sort of earthing those energies and transforming yourself, but also creating a living communication between yourself and the earth and those stars. I mean, I feel whenever you see Venus, don't you just feel her like really on you? But yeah, she really like enters you. She's like right in here and here and here. Like she's such a forceful presence. It's as though she's right in front of your face. You can't look at Venus and not have that experience that she somehow swallowed your consciousness. And I think it's very easy with Venus to have that experience and to develop that, like, oh my God, you're here, and the heart is going, and you're panicking almost because of her like knocking at you, like her presence is so strong. But you can have this with any star or constellation if one consciously seeks out that connection.
And I would also encourage people, something I often will try to do is encourage people to just have this more extended, embodied experience of what happens when you become aware of those connections.
Changing your focus as well, because I mean, so much of the time, and especially in our modern, we are like looking at the phone, and the phone is here, or the computer screen is here, and the distances are like the distance of an arm at most, and we all like lose our longer sight. And then that's not just like looking into the distance at like mountains or the sea or the sky in order to like allow our eye muscles to relax and restore themselves, but it's also like on a level sort of more spiritual. It's that having that sense where your body can breathe out and fill a space between you and something more distant, even something that you can only hold in yourself as an image, like a loved one or someone who's passed, or a planet like Venus that I can't reach. I could never even go there, but I can hold that within myself, and I can have that presence of her on me when I look at her.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think it ties in to this question too by Anne-Marie. Was thinking of something similar, but wondering if Alkistis would consider dancing with others in group, and the star walking as a beautiful image. So what would, what happens when we would do that as a collective, I guess, is what's being asked.
That's really interesting. I haven't danced much with other people. I've usually danced solo. I've done some dancing in a group and some dancing in a partnership, but I think you would have a very powerful experience if the ritual was well constructed and simple, and everybody knew what they were doing and had been taken through some kind of process. It would be quite easy, like a sort of a week or so of getting in touch with these parts of the body and the different senses of the inner body to the outer, and the earth to the above. I think you could do something very interesting. Maybe we should do that and see what happens and find some kind of ritual.
Yes, I agree with that one. And let's turn back to, so you've often described obsession as your method.
Yes.
And I think it's a fundamental, very easy way of understanding what a lot of people's method is, but I think you do it in a really good way. You're turning your attention to Venus in this piece. And so in that way, it brings forward all of the life implications that you've had throughout your whole experience, all of the experiences, the devotional work that you do, years of training in that particular aspects of those mysteries. But you still are, because it's obsession, it's not good enough yet. No, I'm just kidding. It just has to go further. Do you know what I mean? Deeper into it through.
Where do you stop? It's always, something's always moving you. There's even when I'm broken and I can't move, I can't give up. So there's still that calling that's pulling at you, and it's just, I mean, what else are we here for?
Right. And I think in people that work within this capacity, I would speak specifically for, like, as an astro magician, I will sometimes notice that there are particular forms that are really calling and needing my obsession, you know, that I'm, again, that's that moving, being moved by thing we spoke about earlier. But can you walk us through, as you were finding ways to navigate towards choreographing this piece, how did you use obsession to sort of help you get there, so you understood what you wanted to do to create this encounter?
I just immersed myself in Venusian everything, the sympathia, working with the altar to keep it active, and just keep all those things on my person all the time. So despite like the day job, I'm still like, I can smell the rose, or like the star is on me, and all of these, just surround myself with those things. And then when at the evenings and I'm working on movement, it's just it's like a heart thing, but it's oh, I don't know how to even explain that. How do you explain obsession?
I think it is a very natural thing, and I think you see the impulse and the method that you're using. You do see it within the inclinations that we have as someone engaging with stuff in astrological magic. You do see it, but sometimes it becomes less direct. You know, like for instance, people will know, oh, rose,
Yeah.
but they don't do what I think you do, and I think I do, which is you smell that smell.
Yeah.
You allow that smell to penetrate very
Oh
deeply.
yes, yeah. It's a totally, it totally takes over.
Yes.
You just allow, you don't hold back anything, and you allow yourself to feel. It's again very like sex, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't judge, you don't watch, you're just fully present. And so it's that presence and being with in the presence, that trusting. All the exercises were designed, especially the second section, furcula, which is referencing the wishbone on the bird, which is like the fusion of the clavicle. It's so fundamental to opening the space, but also the ascent and the flight, and just this, the how much that expands you, and like the whole ribcage lifts up, and the way that you can then aspire to that thing. So it's a really bodily thing. It's this, I struggle a lot with my body, and I've had a lot of difficulties and continue to have like physical difficulties. So for me, the release is through these experiences, and the way that I can understand what it is to be incarnate is, since I started having these experiences, I can only keep going deeper into that as a way to understand life. But what is it? Oh, how it can, where is life going? Life isn't static, as you keep saying, it's completely dynamic. It's, what is life? This is what I'm trying to understand, but through the movements of the furcular section, which is like, I kind of I twisted into a performance context, things which are like my training, my practical sort of exercises for bringing these awareness into the body, a specific kind of space and a specific kind of ascent, which at the same time is this like end static awareness as well, where she comes down into the body through that expansion of my body, through my allowing myself to move and open and create certain sort of like spaces and capacities within myself to do that. So yeah, I will drench myself in rose perfume, and I will light incense. Like, I do too much of everything. Just except drink, I can't drink, so I'll have like one sip of red wine, which is kind of like my limit. I can't go over half a glass, and that's enough to like get me into a state. Or just to it just has to be like a homeopathic thing sometimes, but for me, that even that homeopathic impulse is enough to like send me off in that direction. And as I was saying about with movement, you don't just like oh, you put your hand up, no, like where does it go? Like you keep putting it up, you follow a movement through its complete life arc, through like the initial impulse, through its blooming into its like fullness, through its like its death, to the death of the movement, where it then goes back into the ground and the energy is gone and you are emptied. And then you're empty and it comes up again, and somehow it keeps coming back. There's this regeneration. So my obsession is tied to that, because the only way I've ever known how to like regenerate from the crises that happen is through this just surrender absolutely to it. And then somehow the life stirs again and the movement comes back. And you are infused with that feeling, and she is there. And you're transformed again. Like you keep undergoing these experiences. I use the term pathophony, taking it from Pierre Klosowski, because he says that every theophany is a pathophony. So you do not experience divinity without having this. It's got a kind of double meaning. There's pathos as in like pure affect. It has to be felt in the deepest regions of one's consciousness, which is like in the marrow, in the forge of the blood, where like the seed bed of life is, where we emerge from. And this is kind of where the oceanic fire and water are, into the way that the body extends into the cosmos in the Taoist sense, or in the sense I was talking about yesterday, where the cosmos is full of this continually moving, singing harmonies of demonic or angelic intelligences, and we are not immune to them. We are not like covered from them. They're like, they move through us all the time, and we just learn how to work with which currents in the air that we're choosing to work with, or that we desire to work with for our, well, in a way you're chosen, because your obsession chooses you, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And I think that there's also something probably about, on many levels, that your process speaks to Babalon, Venus, Ishtar. You know what I mean? Like it's speaking on all those levels to that mystery, if you will. And the last thing I want to say before we watch the rest is, you know, which also maybe through, I don't know if it was through Florensky, but the idea of the unifying the mystical and the scientific, you know what I mean? Because you didn't shy away from, and there's some astrologers and people that practice astrology magically, they don't, they shy away from ever looking at new information about these things to understand them. So could you just tell us about that?
Florensky particularly excites me. He's and a piece of his called Celestial Signs was really important in this. He was a scientist, and he found a way to reconcile, and a mystic and priest, who kind of, well, because of my interest in Stoligov and the space of the chalice and the cupola space, I wanted to find, like, where does this mystical element in the Russian avant-garde come from? I mean, it also informs my book work and the concept of factura, or texture, which you can see in the body as well, is you work with the material, the qualities of a material are the most important thing. So on one sense with Buto, the body is the material, but it's not like a lump of earth in this very inert sense. It's like, no, everything is resonating through the body, and the body becomes the material, in the same way that the materials I work with the books, are to give them an embodied like manifestation in the world. And so I was like, where does this mystical element in the Russian avant-garde come from? Because it's certainly not part of the like revolutionary Stakhanovich or and terrible art that kind of went along with, I guess, Stalin's regime. And so I looked back and I found Pavel Florensky, and he's just a really, really fascinating figure who writes very deeply on mystical things. And he talked about the star that is 1 and 2. Let me find this quote. I won't be able to find it. It's downstairs. I'll share it and I'll stick it in in something. Yeah, but yeah, and he would observe Venus rising in the morning or setting on his walks, and it so resonated with me because he created he discusses the color theory. So there's like a mystical color theory there to do with the colors of the dawn and the way that it goes from like the violet and the darkness to the red and the pinkness of this, like the red Sophia, which is so close to this image of Babylon as an incarnate deity, rather than just as this sort of thelemic idea of the goddess beyond the abyss that's unreachable somehow. I've always felt her as very, very close in the blood, you know, so that she speaks to you on this level. So that was also one of my, how does this connect with Venus? How is she connected with Venus? Because in her whole history, there has, like, the furthest back you go, there is this connection, Ishtar or Inanna, with the star and with Venus. And obviously it's out of observation. So scientists observe, but so do artists and mystics. And I think that if we just observe nature as it is and ourselves as we are, then what we get is we see. It's simply that, it's that simple. We just see and feel. You know, it's a feeling. Like, you can't watch sunrise without feeling it in a very, like,
it's like another body is speaking to a body, isn't it?
yeah, you're present there. There's the space between you is energized, you know, it's alive with light.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, there's a lot to be said there about how you came to know a little bit more about Venus through exploring some of the scientific investigations of Venus. And I don't know if you want to say any last bits about that now that you framed it before we watched the last piece. I know that you'd said the things about the veils and the kind of intensity that is present on Venus.
I was for the performance, I was really thinking, and this is what I spoke to Anji about, particularly for the second part, was to penetrate through, because the Soviet Venera missions, where we get these actual pictures from the surface of Venus, which is like the first time you see Venus and not just her veils, they kind of, in typical Soviet style, completely over-engineered these things because to withstand, like, and they were like, oh, we're hoping this is going to last like 20 minutes or half an hour before it's destroyed, you know, because the force of like the gravity and the heat, everything is just designed to, like, and obviously there's acid in the sulfur of the veil, the clouds, is designed to destroy these things. So there's something so precious about these images that have been sent back, because they were like, you've sent this kind of extension of the human being as a robot programmed to gather this information to die on this planet that has this such a strong resonance with Earth. I mean, she's so present to us and so present in all our lives. And I know you've spoken about that as well. So I was very interested in this, like, going through how to even get to the surface to find this place. And I was imagining I'm going to arrive and be standing on Ishtar Terra. And at this point that I touch Ishtar Terra, which was one of the regions of the surface, that I would be engodded with these energies, and I would also be able to somehow release them into the space, like something might escape from my body through this sort of ecstatic union, this rapture of being taken into this, but through the force of the clouds. So the second part was very much designed musically to be incredibly intense and abrasive, and this kind of vertiginous sense of it just not exactly conflict, but just absolute power. And so that would give way to these more ecstatic sort of revelations, where one is actually in communion with the Numen, the spirit, whatever she sent forth to me, and that there's this two-way process, that I am going up and she's coming down, but at the same time I'm like crashing down, and she is somehow coming up through me, through this contact with me, arriving on the Terra, the Ishtar Terra. This was kind of like what I'm visualizing and imagining, and having that just experience to, like I said, the space in the performance to just allow feeling to come through.
Well, what we'll do is at that point we'll go ahead and watch the last little bit. I'll back it up a bit, and we're moving into that second part. I'm going to try to get it there, and we'll conclude at that point.
Okay.
So I think we're about, apologies for the, let's go from here, maybe. A bit more forward, isn't it, Alkistis? Sorry. Here, we're starting here. And with that, I do want to remember to thank Translates, and is it Callan or Callum?
Cavan. Cavan.
That's right. And what's his full name?
Cavan McLaughlin?
I think that's right. Yes.
Irish.
I meant to have it there because it was such a remarkable conference. What is it that you would like to say about that we just watched? Is there anything you want to add to kind of round us out?
It's very strange that it's so close. And it's very strange watching yourself in this state.
I'm sure.
But I guess I just want to underline how important it is that we do go into our bodies and nurture these experiences, like actually use our bodies as a crucible for these encounters with other, but also because there's still so much. The body is a mystery. I wanted to have this experience with Venus. I mean, my obsession was with Venus because I felt that it was a way of beginning to ask questions about the mystery of the body itself. And I don't think we've even begun to understand what we have the potential to do with our bodies and our consciousnesses. And I feel that we're losing so much because we're giving so much of ourselves away to the digital. And I think about the performance, it's so important to have a space where bodies are together in a space and having these sacred experiences, because I see the dance as a kind of, as one of the only places left where we can have this sacred encounter. And so, and I think that because the churches and things are no longer living and vital, and the energy and the current and the blood is here in us as living beings, having these direct experiences of communion with whatever force or intelligence that we feel most drawn to or by. I think it is very important to nurture this in the body and to find that space in the world as well with each other.
I agree with that. And just to end on, is there anything that, because I think a lot of times with all of it, we spend so much time obsessing over a different kind of obsession, which is the thinking, how do I ever do whatever this is? And I wonder, in my experience, like trying to just hold an inner image, like I'll work with astrological symbols and sigils and place them in different areas of my body and invite angelic forms in. And I mean, this is my simple way of doing this, and see what happens, see what happens, because
start doing it, because it also intensifies and becomes more expansive the more you work with it. So however small you have to start, just start doing something, working with that. Find one little entrance is all you need, and keep doing it, keep repeating, because that's actually how it works.
Definitely. And you'll register with something. And I think the repeating part is really good. And I think moving in circles, very powerful for what we're doing. Seeing the other big circles that are moving, like the ecliptic and the horizon and the meridian, or the equator even projected out into space, starting to experience those bigger circles that you're moving in. A lot can start to happen just from starting there and seeing what happens.
Yes, agreed.
Thanks so much, Alkistis, and thank you guys that joined us. I'm sure lots of people get a lot from watching it later.
I hope so.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. And again, thank you for your time and for your expertise and your knowledge that you've shared. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Thank you, JD.
Bye,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. See you soon.